What is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekaWhat video. In this video, I'm going to be building the ultimate budget RTX 3050 gaming PC build, featuring this, the brand new i3-12100F. Could this be the perfect combo, or does it bottleneck our new fast 3050? I guess there's only one way to really find out. So grab yourself a can, relax, and let's get on with the build. Let's actually kick things off by taking a look at the motherboard and all of the components we can install into it before moving on to the case and GPU a little bit later. At the heart of the build is the i3-12100F I mentioned in the introduction. With 4 of Intel's new performance cores and none of their efficiency cores, 8 threads and a max turbo clock speed of up to 4.3 GHz, on paper, this performs more than well enough for the 3050 we'll be coupling it with. Plus, it comes with Intel's brand new and upgraded stock cooler, something we'll be taking advantage of to save a bit of cash in this build, as we install our CPU onto the motherboard choice, the ASUS Prime B660M D4. The B660 chipset makes absolutely the most sense for a system like this. While not the cheapest chipset on offer when it comes to the latest Intel processors, support for memory overclocking, Gen 4 SSDs, PCIe 4.0, all that good stuff makes it a very usable board, and one that actually is pretty future-proof. Want to pop in an RTX 3060 Ti? This board has all the other features we need to make sure we can avoid bottlenecks. Crucially, this board also supports DDR4 RAM, something I'll come onto in more detail shortly. Here we have the CPU itself. We'll come back to installing that shortly, and then underneath, if I can actually get into this box in some way, shape or form, okay, that's probably not the way, but it worked. We have got the cooler itself. Look at this. Now, we featured this in one of our other 3050 builds, but with an i5-12400F. It's the same cooler, and it should do a good enough job of keeping the chip cool. Something like a Cooler Master 212 RGB Black Edition is a great upgrade if you've got $30 or $40 to spend, but components right now are expensive, so you probably don't. We can then go ahead and drop the processor into the motherboard with the triangle on the CPU at the bottom left corner, return the socket down, the black cover will pop off, and apply a bit of pressure with our included air retention bracket on the motherboard. Once you've done that, we can then add on the CPU cooler. Now you'll see here, this basically has 4 pins, 1 on each corner, and some included pre-applied thermal paste, meaning you haven't got to drop on any of your own. Untuck the fan cable for now, as that will make obviously installing the cooler a lot easier to do. All you then have to do is basically line your cooler up on top of the processor and locate the little plastic push pins on each corner. Push each of them down one by one, and they'll make a nice little click sound. Do that for all of them. Then you may want to just give them another final push to make sure they're in. And a good way to check if you're confident is to pull the motherboard up and give it a bit of a wiggle by the cooler. If the cooler pops off, you know it's not installed properly. And for those of you saying, James, you shouldn't be wiggling your motherboard by the cooler. Well, I think it's better to do that and find the cooler's not installed than fry your CPU because the cooler was not installed. Talking of frying your CPU, there is one more really, really important thing to do, and that is to plug up the CPU fan header. On this board, it's the lighter grey of the 2 ports on the left-hand side. What we're going to do then is move on to the RAM or the memory as the next component on the hit list today. This is Corsair's Vengeance RGB RS, a 16GB 3600 MHz kit. For Intel CPUs, 3200 MHz is about as high as you need to go, but let's be honest, a kit that's slightly faster, slightly more expensive, isn't exactly going to cause you any problem. In this build, we'll be installing the RAM into the grey RAM DIMM slots, usually located as the 2nd and 4th, if of course you've got 4 DIMMs. That's 2 for this video. The addition of 4 RAM DIMM slots to a motherboard is a really, really valuable feature. And if the dilemma is a motherboard that's $10 cheaper with 2 RAM DIMMs, or one that's got 4 but costs you a tiny bit extra money, please spend the cash. It's one of the best upgrades you can possibly make. Once that's done though, the motherboard assembly is essentially complete. This is the point you would install an M.2 NVMe drive if you had one, but we're going for something a bit different, which I'll touch on in more detail later. For now, we can put the motherboard assembly literally to one side and then move on to the case choice for this system. COUGAR's MX430 Air RGB. COUGAR were a brand that back in the day on the channel I used to feature a lot in our budget content. They made some fantastic budget chassis and we looked at one of their newer options back in 2021. It feels like an eternity ago now. It's great then to take a look at one of their 2022 options, a case with plenty of airflow, plenty of RGB, and crucially, a lovely tempered glass side panel. One thing that I recommend you do with any case in any build is lay it flat on a table, as that would actually make installing the motherboard. As you can see, these are not captive thumb screws. They don't stick with the side panel. A little bit disappointing, but it's a budget case. I can live with it. And then we lay it on the front. We can take off the rear side panel as well. Giving you a nice overhead angle of me unscrewing our lovely COUGAR. I've forgotten the name of it already. COUGAR Mesh Airflow RGB Case Extravaganza. We're then going to pick out the I/O shield of the motherboard. That's if, of course, we have one. Some have a built-in I/O. Very fancy. We can't quite afford those luxuries in today's build. So grab yourself one of these and click it into the rear of the case. The last time I did this, I cut my finger. So today I'm going to be extraordinarily careful to make sure I don't hurt myself. I've just hurt my finger. I've actually cut myself. Oh no, that's a disaster. Ow, 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 ow. This is not getting any less painful. Ow. That hurt like a lot. Ow. Not the way that this was supposed to go. We then need to cross-reference each of the holes on the motherboard with any of the standoffs that are installed in the case. So for us, we've got 3 at the top, 3 along the middle, and then 2 at the bottom, slightly offset from each other in height. If we take a look at our overhead camera angle, you can see 1, 2, 3 at the top, so we need to add 1 into the top right. 1, 2, 3 across the middle, we need to add 1 onto the far right-hand side. And then there's 2 at the bottom, but they are in the wrong places. They need to be moved here and then here as well. Basically, we're going to move those standoffs around, get them in the right places, and then screw the motherboard in through all of the screw holes on the board itself. Pretty easy, actually, when you come to do it. We're then able to move on to the SSD. Now, I talked about doing something a bit different for this build, and this next component's going to be the most controversial. We're making waves over here on the channel as far as parts go. This is the SEAGATE Barracuda Q1, a 2.5-inch Sata SSD drive. Now, James, why haven't you gone NVMe? Well, the truth is the 3050 is powerful, but not that powerful. It's not going to be bottlenecked by slower storage, and something like this will still give you far higher speeds than a traditional hard drive, a good few hundred megabytes a second pretty consistently, and hopefully much faster Windows boot up times than the probably dated PC you'll be upgrading from to this. In our build today, we need to actually remove the built-in 2.5-inch SSD sled from the rear of the case. One single thumb screw will do us nicely, and then it slides, I believe, out of the way. Lovely stuff. We're then able to go ahead and simply drop the drive onto the sled, use some small screws to secure it into place, and then pop it back onto the rear of the motherboard tray. We'll deal with any cables and wiring later, because first we've got a more exciting component to attend to. It is, of course, the one and only GPU. This right here is the ASUS RTX 3050. Specifically, it's their STRIX model. Disclaimer alert with big red flashing sirens and exclamation marks. You don't need to buy the STRIX version of the 3050. Sorry, ASUS. It's a great GPU. It's super cool and the cooler's fantastic. But it's more suited to like a 3080 tier of card. Instead, ASUS's own dual card or other options from competitors will work well. And in the current market, any 3050 you can actually get hands-on with a price that you're comfortable with is what I'd recommend going for. All you actually need to know though is that this is a great card for 1080p gaming, high settings, 60 FPS, and even playing the likes of Fortnite and Apex Legends at competitive settings, and achieving triple-digit frame rates. A few people have accused Nvidia of basically rehashing the 1660 Super with this card, but I don't fully agree. The addition of DLSS, Nvidia's AI-backed resolution scaler, makes a phenomenal difference, as you can see with our 1660 Super and 3050 side-by-sides on your screen now. Plus, even if they have, who really cares? The 1660 Super was the step up from this card in the previous generation, and that's often how the upgrade cycles work. At the end of the day, it's about finding a GPU right now at a price you're happy with. And this 3050 ticks that box for a lot of people. What you need to do to install the card is first hover it over your GPU. It's not looking like it's going to fit. Right, this is one thing I'd sort of forgotten about the STRIX. It's quite a long GPU, so let me sort of slightly go into just a little bit of a panic. Let me remove this rear cover. And I think then, hopefully, it should just about fit. I say hopefully, because if it doesn't, I'm just going to look like a complete muppet. Right, So for us today, we need to just pop out the top 2 PCIe slots. That's this one and that one. I'm hoping that's going to have made all the difference. Can we maybe slot the card in like that, then tuck it through the PCIe lanes? Oh no. Oh yes. Oh my god. That is slightly insane. Okay. So it does fit, but literally only just. To be honest with you, I think the fans on the case are actually what is giving us our problem. With a bit of determination, we can make magic happen. Yes, I think definitely you should go for the ASUS dual card because that's very tight, but it does technically just about squeeze in. Let's screw it. A millimetre bigger, that was not going to work.
Oh my god.
Try and move the card.
That really is...
It's
wow.
a bit
Okay.
It's tight.
You've pushed it to the limit there.
I think that's what COUGAR wanted.
Oh, I think
They went, James, we've got a new case out. We want you to...
And you've properly tested it, you see.
I've tested it. I've maximised the potential of this fantastic product. Right, thumb screws. Let's whack those in. They're not the right ones. Oh, I've lost me marbles, ladies and gents. They've well and truly gone everywhere. Whee! And once that's done, we can move on to the power supply. Now, technically, the 3050 requires 550 watts. That's the recommended level. But this 500 watt unit from Cooler Master, I think is going to work a charm. Of course, we'll test it. And if you see it working in the benchmarks, you know nothing's gone catastrophically wrong. But this build for me today was all about getting the most value possible out of our humble little 3050. What we're going to do then is screw the power supply into the rear of the case, plug up a power cable to the CPU in the top left corner, motherboard on the far right hand side, the big connection, our GPU, and of course then our Sata power and data for the SSD at the rear. And once we've done that, we can boot the system up and check out the performance. But first, how good it looks in an epic glam montage. I'll see you in a sec, but first, roll that montage. Now that we've seen how good this budget system looks when it's all powered up, it's time to take a look at performance. And we'll kick things off by giving you guys a summary of all the different results that we gathered on this system. All of the gameplay you'll have seen in this video has been captured directly from this 3050 and i3 build as well. And we'll be taking a deeper dive title by title in just a moment. Take a look at those temperatures on your screen now as well. Not half bad, right, for a stock cooler and budget GPU. Now let's kick things off by taking a closer look at GTA 5, the first of the titles today. Here at 1080p high settings, we achieved 115 frames per second on average, using NVIDIA FrameView and MSI Afterburner's Riva Tuner to capture frame rate for all of our titles. Moving on to Battlefield 2042, and I'm glad to report some good results here. At 1080p high settings with DLSS enabled and set to performance mode, we pulled in 80 frames per second on average. 1080p high on a 50 tier GPU is not half bad. This was 6 frames per second more than with DLSS disabled. Quite a minimal difference, but an extra 6 FPS will definitely take. In our next title today, Call of Duty Vanguard, our DLSS differential was much higher. We tested at 1080p with DLSS enabled and set to performance mode. Here we achieved 107 frames per second at high settings overall. This was a much bigger gap, 22 FPS to be precise, higher than with DLSS disabled, showing the power of DLSS on a budget card like this one, something which really sets aside the 3050 from the 1660 and 1660 Super that people like to compare it to. In Forza Horizon 5, the next game today, we tested at 1080p high once again. Yes, of course, if you want more frame rate, you can tune the settings down, but we wanted to show you what the best 1080p high results we could get were. Here we got 89 frames per second on average, and considering 60 is the marker for most games, 45 for a racing game, 90 is more than good enough. Halo Infinite is next up, and it was once again a title that impressed. 1080p high settings gave us 105 FPS, with 90 and 99 percentiles that showed little deviation in our overall average frame rates. Next up is Apex Legends, moving on to some of our more first-person shooter esports titles. 1080p high settings gave us 91 FPS on average, with 75 and 70 for the 90 and 99 percentiles. After that, we tested out Valorant. Of course, one of the most esports heavy games out there, but a great test of a budget system like this. 1080p high settings gave us 268 FPS. Not really much more to say than that. We also tested out Fortnite at 1080p competitive settings. Here we achieved 178 frames per second. You might be wondering why it's one of the only titles we test at competitive settings. It's because so many of our viewers play this game at 1080p with everything tuned down to low and the render distance set up to far. Finally, to wrap things up, we've got a bit of Call of Duty's Warzone. We tested out at 1080p high once again with DLSS enabled, and pulled in just shy of 100 FPS, 97 to be precise. This gave us a small but very helpful increase of 9 frames per second over Call of Duty Warzone with DLSS disabled. So once again, some great frame rates and great results. And it wraps up a really impressive suite of numbers from our humble little 3050. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to get subscribed. Thank you very much for watching. We really appreciate the support. And as always, we'll see you in the next one.